Yes, Mr. James Workshop. The bribe for not nerfing Dark Angels will be in the post. I'll get that over to you shortly. Oh, I gotta go. I've got to record now. You didn't just hear that, did you? So, ladies and gents, the slate has dropped, and in all honesty, I was expecting that Dark Angels were going to see a lot of red. I thought maybe Company of Hunters would go to 3DP. I thought that the Ravenwing Command Squad would lose support, but none of that came to pass. It turns out I was actually just a massive doomsayer. What it looks like is that Games Workshop have actually gone for quite a minor slate with this change. Now, that is probably because both the Orcs and the Space Marine codexes are just around the corner. And as we've seen from some of the announcements with the Space Marine codex, we can expect a pretty damn big update, because we're not just seeing changes to Space Marines, we're seeing all of the codex non-compliant chapters, all of the Chaos factions, everyone like that, possibly even Grey Knights, all changing. So it's absolutely massive come October, but instead they've decided that actually things are fine, which is phenomenal if you are a competitive Dark Angels player and you are looking at either tending LGT or LVO. So very little actually changed. I was very surprised that the changes that we had basically were Samael going up 10, Recon Hunter going up 10, and then the third unit of Ravenwing Black Knights going up 5, I think. It was 5 or 10, but it was very light changes. And then you add in the fact that the Lion actually got a buff, because now his turn 1 up-down does work, because now we do it in our command phase. I think overall we may have just got better. So this is a really interesting one, and it's a great time to be a Dark Angels player. It's just, do you have 3 land speed of Vengeances? Which is always a difficult one. But overall, we did see some light nerfs across the board for Librarius, so like the Librarian and Terminator armor. The Land Raider Redeemer went up 10 points as well. If you are playing Raven Guard, then of course the sadly no longer with us Centurion Devastator squad also went up 15 points for 6 of them, which I know a certain friend of mine will be quite upset about, especially as he wanted to give them a nice send-off. So not ideal that for them, but overall for Dark Angels with the Company of Hunters, we're in a great spot. And I think that the changes across the board, it doesn't really impact the meta as crazy like some of the other abusers have gone, so demons getting up in points, all that kind of stuff, but we'll come on to that later. Honestly, I think the big thing from this is, what the hell? How did this happen? I thought that Dark Angels were going to get massively hit, and they deserve to be perfectly honest. That Company of Hunters list is obnoxiously strong, and being able to go an average of 33 inches, including charge on turn 1 with a unit, and then deleting whatever you really want to, is silly. And then having that consistent fire base is also quite silly. I'm really glad they didn't decide to nerf Vengeances or like hit the battery enhancement, because in all honesty, Vengeances are quite weak unless they've got the battery enhancement in 11th edition, as my experience so far. But I think in all honesty, Dark Angels have pulled a bit of a fast one, especially with the Lion improving and some of our competitors getting weaker. I think it'd be really interesting to see how we fit into that ecosystem with the other changes that we're starting to see. So maybe we'll come on to this, but things like Sisters, the Demons changing from being probably Excess, although Excess is still really good, to something like maybe Demonic Incursion, because that's going to take hold. I think that we have to assume that Dark Angels have kind of dodged a big nerf here, because we are going to change so drastically when it comes to the October Codex. Obviously, we've seen some of the really cool stuff that's coming out there. We've seen some of the heavy Legends changes that are coming as well, some that I personally don't agree with. I'm not a huge fan of things like Predators and Vindicators going, but I'm really hoping that implication is that we'll see like a Gladiator Vindicator kind of hybrid, which would actually be really nice to see, really cool to see a new siege tank in the Space Marine line. But I've got no evidence or no rumors to back that up at this point, so it's a little bit disappointing right now. But, you know, I think everyone would be disappointed when their units go to Legends, especially with the Storm Raven. I thought like Storm Raven was the first purchase when I got back into the hobby that I was like, this is what I'm going to reward myself for. So a little sad to see that go, but in all honesty, that's more a nostalgia thing than a gameplay thing. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that Flyers are seeing a reduction in the amount that they're in the game, although Orcs decided to buck that trend rather considerably. I think we are just going to have to wait at this point. We will be seeing lots of big changes like T6 Deathwing Knights, pretty tasty. I think it's going to be great when we actually get the book, but right now, I think it's yeah, sure, I can moan about the meta being the way it is, but my steak is too juicy and my lobster's too buttery right now. So it's a pretty good spot to be in. Now, if you are new to the channel, I just wanted to kind of give a what we learnt, because if you watch the footage that I've done already, you'll know that I played this Dark Angels list at WTC. I've got my review for that video coming out on Saturday, so you'll see a big review in terms of how it performed, how it plays, everything like that. And the big headlines are that it's insanely strong, which I don't think anyone was surprised about. It's going to continue to do very powerful things. And that is only good for Dark Angels players because we're going to be playing 11th edition incredibly efficiently. We're staying in Recon, which was something that I maybe thought that would change as well, which is even better. We just need to adapt our lists ever so slightly. I think overall, there's some really impressive changes. You just need to fiddle around with your chaff units. So that's what I've been doing. And I do have a list that I'm going to break down after I go through all of the other things that have happened during the slate. But the main learning is that if you are able to go first and to use the Samael brick to take out a target that you don't want your opponent to play the game with, which is very easy considering how fast he is and how damaging he is, then suddenly you are on the front foot for most of that game, and it's very difficult for opponents to wrest that control off of you. I think this list is fine for teams because there's ways that, you know, it adds tactics to it because there's ways to blunt it, all that kind of thing. For singles, I don't know if this is healthy just because it's kind of, oh, I've gone first, I win the game. And that, in my opinion, is not healthy for the game because obviously we had that during 10th a lot where it's like, oh, I've gone second, I just win because I don't have to do anything now. I'll stand on the objectives at the end of the game. It's singles, I only need to win by a point. And similarly, Dark Angels just goes, oh, I full sent. There we go. And that isn't ideal, in my opinion. And we learnt just how consistent it is. But people will also get longer to adapt to how to play against this Dark Angels list. And I think that is also something that we need to do. How can we protect those land speed of vengeances for longer? How can we sort of position ourselves so they're not, you know, they're not free killing land speed of vengeances? I think that's really going to be the learning point for Dark Angels. So understanding those maps and I think really working on those maps as they've been massively revamped. Well, massively revamped, that remains to be seen. But there's been considerable changes to maps. I think now we've got to think about that a little bit more in terms of our positioning. And those land speed of vengeances are not small. They are quite chunky models. So we need to make sure that we are using them in the most efficient way possible. So what happened to everyone else? It was pretty light, as we kind of covered. I think there was some decent nerfs to some of the real nasty top performers, with the exception of Dark Angels. Obviously, Orcs didn't change in the slightest, but that's because their codex is about to come out. So it's like, what's the point? Don't use that brain power to try and balance an army that's irrelevant in a week's time. Use it to try and balance the book, and please, for the love of God, try and redo those points. Like, come on, seriously. They're stupid. So I think that looking at it, the meta's got a little bit better. I think it's still a little bit silly in many ways, but we're at the start of an edition. We would expect that. You know, quite frankly, why wouldn't it be silly at the start of an edition? Everyone's experimenting with new stuff. New units are coming in. Units that we forgot about are going to be used a lot more. That is healthy, I think, in some ways. I think the only non-healthy thing is that Dark Angels kind of fully dodge that, with the exception of maybe 20, 30 points going up. I think it's nice to see that Custodes and Demons did cop that nerf. Custodes felt quite brainless in terms of the way that it played, which was a little bit disappointing. There's been other versions of Custodies which have been super interesting, having loads of different play and loads of nuance to them, but unfortunately the latest has just been, here are all these Terminators, they've got 4-up invuns and T7 and 4 wounds, what do you do? And that was a really nice stat check army, and of course that is good to see some stat check armies. But for something like Custodies, I prefer to see a little bit more nuance to them. And right now, I don't think we're seeing that as much, which is a bit of a shame. So I'm hoping with the changes, we're not just going to suddenly go, oh, okay, I'm going to take 15 Wardens, done. Which I think some people might default to. We'll see if that is actually good. I personally don't think it will be, because it's too easy for armies to not be monophase and to play around that feel no pain. You know, the amount of 3 damage that's going around, it's only 1 phase that you're inefficient into those units. So I think overall, that's probably not the best choice for those players, but we might see it early. I'm really liking the change to Sisters. I think that the fact that now they're getting 1 Miracle Dice at the start of every turn is really good. I think the Penitent Host list that Australia played at WTC was already very good, and really innovative and interesting. It's quite difficult to play, I think, and it's quite unforgiving. So it's why we might not see as much of it. But overall, I think it is super exciting to see Sisters kind of back on the menu, and I think they deserve to be. It was a shame that because Miracle Dice is so hard to balance, they got kicked into the ground as hard as they did. They didn't deserve as hard of a nerf as they got, so it's nice to see GW kind of throwing them a bone, making those Insidiants a little bit better as well, making it work with the Celestian detachment, I think is overall really positive. And I think Sisters are actually going up to that kind of A tier bracket quite quickly. I will do a tier list on factions at some point soon after the slate, but you know, that's my initial gut feeling. Sisters are looking good. I really like Demonic Incursion now that it's taken hold as well. I think that we've seen Excess, we've seen Blood Legion, we've seen them get nerfed now, which is great. However, Demonic Incursion feels like it's always had play, but because of its disposition, it's not quite been there. Now that it's taken hold, I think that does genuinely have play, and I'm really excited to see what some of the more specialist Demons players are going to be able to do when they're looking at powerful units like Be'lakor, Scarbrand, Lords of Change. I think there's plenty of really interesting stuff that they can bring to the table, and that battle shocking ability at -1 has got considerably better as we've gone into 11th. So I think there's a lot more play to Demons, which is nice to see that Monster Mash kind of style of Demons coming back. I think that's a little bit more fun than playing against the kind of 18 Fiends of Slanesh or that kind of stuff, or 18 Crushers, all that nonsense. It was great as those lists were. So overall, I think some really positive changes for Demons. The map updates, really, that remains to be seen how impactful they're going to be, but I think overall staging is going to change massively when we re-look at those sort of matchups, and you've really got to relearn those matchups and understand, particularly for teams where you're picking your map, or for singles where it's a little bit more dictated to you. You need to make sure that you're understanding what positioning you can do to really bully your opponent. And particularly as a Dark Angels player, you will need to know that for where your vengeances can be, where your Samael brick needs to be to go and punish your opponent, all that kind of stuff. Because if you don't end up in those positions, then you'll end up struggling. You really can lose a game of 11th on your positioning, even more so than you could in 10th. So overall, I think those map changes will be super impactful. And now, of course, the list. I wasn't expecting to be writing a Company of Hunters Darkflight Pursuit list when the slate dropped. I thought it was going to get nerfed into the ground, but it didn't. So, of course, we're going to kick off with Lionel Johnson. Obviously, he's had his up-down change to it now being in our command phase, and that is great. I am really impressed with that ability overall. The Lion now at 265, phenomenal. Like, he will be in basically every list I write, I think, at this point. I'm interested to see what happens to him when the new what happens to Gulliman as well, when the new Space Marine Codex drops, and does he get an update if Gulliman gets a massive change as well? That'll be super interesting. But right now, I'm just going to enjoy playing him because I think he's really good. We've got the Samael brick in there. Yes, it's gone up 20 points. No, I do not care that it's gone up 20 points. It is well worth it still. We still like that average 33 inches turn 1. If you suddenly go first, your matchup suddenly just goes, oh, cool, I just destroy you. Dumb. Cool, no worries. in some games it is genuinely just as simple as that, which has its benefits for us. Doesn't have many benefits for the game, but it's great that like you have those options, and you can be very surgical in the tools that you're removing from your opponent, which I think is a great way for you to be able to play. Now we've downgraded these 6 Inner Circle companions to Azrael and 5 Assault Intercessors. Now this was something that some very skilled players such as John Lennon and Innes Wilson were already doing, and I think, having had a quick chat with Innes in the pub, that is the correct move to do. I was desperately also trying to fit in the Tech Marine and the Extra Speeder, but I ended up not being able to in this case. I think it was 10 points shy. But overall, like, I think it looks really quite solid. The Deathwing Knights in there, very, very good, because they help keep those land speed vengeances alive with the way that you can position them and kind of force your opponent's eye elsewhere, because their survivability, their ability to kind of really push your opponent in key areas. I think that massively supports them, and overall they are still a very powerful unit. So and especially with more people bringing mass 2 damage to deal with the 4 wound models, I think these guys really do eat well in that environment. Then we've got a land speeder. I've always been playing just the 1. Other Dark Angels players have been playing 2. I would prefer to play 2, but I can make 1 work, as I've been doing with my list already. So, c'est la vie. Next, we've got 3 battery land speeder vengeances, because they are just the best unit available to Dark Angels. The enhancement is great. The damage output on those units is disgusting. Overall, it's just like, why would you not play them? The only reason that you would not play them is because you don't own them, to be perfectly honest. So get on TCS. But it's crazy just to see the output and the consistency that these units now bring. But it works well for us. Next, I've got 2x3 Ravenwing Black Knights, and I'm using these as my skirmish. And I have grown to love this unit a lot more as time has gone on. I wasn't really sold on it at first, but actually using it to kind of zoom out and just pump 9 plasma shots into a unit was really solid. Like, that skirmish ability and the ability to, yeah, sure, it might hit on 4s if they're in cover and everything like that. But then you're wounding on 2s into Marines. So you're in a decent spot where you're quite likely to pick up a Marine squad between your shooting and your combat. And then you've traded, a 75-point unit, which may also not die because it's got an invuln, and like they're reasonably good at like scamming damage. So overall, the unit really grew on me as I got through WTC. So they've come back as a 2. I've seen, I think it was Louis Ballington had 3x3 in his Surrey Primarchs list. I really liked that. Obviously, they have now taken that slight nerf from the fact that you are paying a tax when it gets to the 3rd. But overall, I think 2x3, really nice spot to be in. They're very quick. They're surprisingly efficient into Marine bodies, and like, if your opponent puts something out in the open, they can do the business. I think it's more their shooting that attracts me than their combat. Their combat's a bit naff, but equally those dev wounds, they can chip off a few wounds on a vehicle. Like, if the land speed Avengers do have a moment where they don't fully perform their potential, taking off those last couple of wounds of a Malaceptor or something like that with the dev wounds, really useful just to be able to get through there. Then we've got 2x5 scouts, so we changed some intercessors to scouts. They're going to hold our home objective. To be honest, I prefer that change because it gives us another unit with up-down at the back of the board, and looking at some of the missions that we're going to be doing, so things like Recon v Recon, Recon versus Priority Asset, no, actually not Recon versus Priority Assets, is the other way there, but like some of the others where doing an action on their objective, so actually Recon versus Purge the Foe. It's really nice to have a late game ability just to pick something up, pop it on their home or pop on their expansion and do one of those actions. So I think that scouts are really good in that role. And I'm quite happy using them. So we've brought the second unit of scouts in. The other unit of scouts is, as usual, screening for Samael, and just sort of being a general pain in the backside early on, maybe doing some actions, all that kind of good stuff. And then finally, we round out the list with a Storm Speeder Thunderstrike, just to make sure that we are able to take down those tough targets by giving our Land Speeder Vengeances +1 to wound. So there is the list. It is strong. It's barely changed, and in all honesty, it's a damn good time to be a Dark Angels player. If you are playing the list and kind of struggling with how you're getting on with it, I do coaching, and you can sit down together, work out how you need to do your positioning, work out how we can threat analysis, all that kind of stuff, and make sure that you are getting the full potential out of this list, because it truly is powerful. And if you are looking to go to something like LVO or LGT, then now is the perfect time to sort of re-review that and make sure you're getting it right. So there's the Slate Brothers, and make sure that you're joining the Discord so you can get excited with all the other Dark Angels fans and all the other Space Marine fans in there. Make sure that you are, giving us a like, giving us a subscribe, all that kind of thing. And most importantly, stay loyal, brothers. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching.